I am live at a cemetery. Now, there's an oxymoron. This is the Monroe Crypt, where Mrs. Monroe is buried. And apparently, if you ask her what she's doing, she'll respond. This is a allegedly restored Mrs. Monroe Crypt. They put that concrete roof on it, and they've left a scaffolding in there because they don't trust their new concrete roof. Anyways, here we are at Friendship Cemetery, the site of over 12,000 dead folks. Many of them founding fathers of the town. They're mostly that direction. And two burial vaults of Civil War dead. Columbus was a hospital town when the Civil War kicked off. The Battle of Shiloh happened. We were far away, but not so far away. They brought wagon loads upon wagon loads of the injured to Columbus, and the people opened their homes, their hotels, and cared for the wounded, most of whom didn't die apparently from their wounds, but from disease. But hey, we're going to be a little shaky because my dogs are walking with me. Anyways, beautiful out here today, and I have never done a live before, so I test the waters, and hopefully I won't make anyone seasick. There we go. Now I have the dogs on the other hand. Okay, let's look at this beautiful family plot. This is the Chandler family plot. It's primarily Maria Chandler's relatives. Gray died, I think, in the 1860s. Nothing to do with the war. He was a lawyer. He actually was very brilliant. He went to law school very early and was recognized as a very smart individual. Came to Columbus at some point from Georgia via Mobile, where he still had business for the rest of his life. And Maria was a very wealthy woman in her own right. And this is their marker. And then this is a nephew, Peter Stewart Harston. Yes, it says Hairston, but they pronounce it Harston. Peter was a Klondike gold chaser who figured out that digging the gold was not that much fun, and he became a gold speculator. So he would buy the gold from the miners, and then he would take it back to Canada and sell it for them and recoup his money and then some. Peter ended up dying in a horrible fire in a gentleman's club that would have been kind of like a hotel social club for businessmen in Toronto during World War One. Somebody set an incendiary on the roof because they didn't like that the American young people were coming up to join in with the Canadian military because we had not entered World War One at that point. Anyways, he died of smoke inhalation, and he was literally right next to the part where the bomb was set off. And his wife put him on in sawdust and ice, and he came down the day after he died, or that night, on the train to Columbus. He was met by a wagon and family and brought straight to Friendship Cemetery to be buried. Thankfully, he died in February when it was cold and probably was able to be preserved a little longer. There are others buried here. Mamie Taylor Franklin Hairston. Now, she would go on to marry one of the Franklins of the Franklin Square. And the interesting thing about her is she was the mother-in-law of Estelle Oldham at one point. Now, Estelle Oldham was a young woman from Oxford, Mississippi, whom her son had fallen in love with. And Estelle would marry, have children, and move and live in Hawaii, and then eventually in Shanghai, China with her husband. And then things got a little hairy, and was not happy, and she divorced her husband, and she went back to her sweetheart, whom her parents had forbidden her to marry, William Faulkner. So that's our Columbus connection to William Faulkner. We have the beautiful Otley family marker here, obelisk. I don't know a whole lot about the Otleys, but they were very wealthy. And then we have lots of other interesting folks. Let's go over here and check out old Stephen D. Lee. Now, Stephen D. Lee was from Charleston, South Carolina. He was the officer who ordered the first shot fired at Sumter. Yes, the Battle of Sumter, which I think it just had its anniversary. And he ended up getting injured in the Civil War. I think he was a major at that point. He may have been a colonel. Falls in love with a local girl, marries her, and then after the war, they came to Columbus. They lived in Hickory Sticks for many years and owned acres and acres of land, of which they donated quite a few acres over there near Hickory Sticks, and Lee Park was created. And Lee Park was also, my understanding, before it was a park, General Lee allowed cannon placements there and fortifications to defend the town's entry. Of course, there were far more other than that out toward the hospital and on the riverbanks, etc., etc. But Lee, after the war, well, he's quite a controversial figure because he was very much a white supremacist in his era, but he was a huge advocate of education, specifically mechanizing farming in the South, because there had to be a new way to become solvent as farmers. And so he was the first president of Mississippi A&M, College of Mississippi, which is now Mississippi State University. And he and his wife are buried here, along with their only child, a son. And they have, and other family members here. General Lee's is that white marker back there. I always thought this was a very beautiful marker. Let's wander this way a little bit. Now, here are some very interesting older families in Columbus that are buried here. I'll do more on them later. The O'Neills, who was a builder, are behind me over here. The Carruthers, I always like this one. I think it's beautiful. Although, and I like the wrought iron, even though it's higgledy-piggledy at this point and starting to collapse and rust. I think that's a really cool marker. And it's the Buchanan family. It's the family tomb of Henry Buchanan. Now, I don't know the significance of Henry Buchanan, but we can look him up. But where I'm headed is over here to the Johnston family. They were quite controversial. So during the Civil War, the Johnstons were Yankees. Yes, they were Yankees. They were from New Jersey. Their children went to schools like Princeton and Harvard and Yale. And which other children of this area who came from wealthy parents, their sons also went to significant schools. But the Johnstons maintained their relationship with their family in New Jersey, and especially his wife. But he built a beautiful home here called the Cotton House, which is on 3rd Avenue South. It's a massive home. It, like all the other old homes in town, need a lot of work. But the interesting thing about Johnston's home is that the reason it was called the Cotton House was because William Johnston, two things. He owned a cotton mill. The cotton mill came in after the Civil War, but prior to that, during the Civil War, he was tasked with making sure that every piece of cotton brought in from the fields after the Civil War during Reconstruction was counted and taxed. So he was not a very popular person for quite a while because he was considered a carpetbagger. Even though he lived here, he remained in the South until he was, I think, 101. He lived quite a long life. Yeah, so there's some interesting characters here. But what I find most interesting is while Mr. Johnston's buried here, literally right there is the Matthews family, and their home, or the home of their son, was used for every meeting of the Ku Klux Klan of Lowndes County after the Civil War in the first generation of the Klan. Yeah, so that's interesting of who we end up buried with. But Columbus has a really interesting history of, just like any other town, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Here's one of the burial vaults of the Civil War dead who died here in Columbus or died on their way to Columbus and then were buried. We have two of them. One's on the other side of the cemetery. This one is a lot of the unknown. The other cemetery is mostly identified. And then there are cenotaphs to some generals who were from here or lived here and were of significance. So to me, this is really pretty. It looks like a big magnolia branch fell. Ew. But here we are, in between the row upon row of the Confederate dead who were never reunited with their family, who were injured or fell gravely ill at the Battle of Shiloh, and were transplanted, or rather transported here to Columbus, where they are under these beautiful magnolia trees. Now, interesting thing about this is when the war was over, there were a group of women who, in May, decided that they would decorate the graves of the Confederate dead. Well, there were also Union soldiers buried here at one point. They've now been repatriated to a Union cemetery in Ohio. But the ones who were buried here were at that time undecorated. And so the women started something called Decoration Day here, and they put flowers on every grave, including the Union soldiers' graves, because they thought, rightly so, that the soldiers were someone's sons. And if those mothers knew where their sons were, they would have been there to remember their fallen child. But since they weren't, they felt it was their duty to decorate for the blue and the gray. And a guy actually, a poet, actually wrote a poem about the decorating of the graves here in Columbus and the decoration. I can't remember the poet's name, but the poem is called The Blue and the Gray, and it's a very telling poem of the sentiments of the time of the beginning of the healing, which is still going on because some people can't let go, of the dead and the destruction in our country. Anyways, I just wanted to take you on a little walk, and I'm going to start doing some lives of some of the places in Columbus and some of the more interesting people and my walks with the Dags. And shh, don't tell on me. Apparently you're not supposed to have dogs in the cemetery, but I don't think the dead care. And since we clean up after ourselves like good citizens, I don't know why that matters. I see more dirt and debris and messes in the cemeteries from the living than any dogs. Anyways, here we are under this massive magnolia that has grown around this marker. It's kind of a fitting end to this video today. I don't want to forget history, and I want you to understand how beautiful and important history is to our country, and how each of these people buried here, with and without stones, because I can bet you anything that that plot is full, and that one's full, and that one's full, even though there aren't markers for every space. Someone's there underneath, and I try and find the obscure, the ones that nobody knows about and often unidentified, and find where they're buried and share their story. So I hope you'll come along for more lives. And oh, somebody's here. Who's here? I have someone watching my live, and I want to thank you for being here. Anyways, it's a beautiful place to come walking. It's a beautiful place to learn a little bit more about history. And that's it for today from Friendship Cemetery. On other days, I'll take you around other parts of town. Have a good one.